How one small mistake ruined his life completely and sent him to prison for a crime he didn't commit, until the truth finally came out. In the fall of 2012, in a quiet town outside Columbus, Ohio, life rarely surprised anyone. People followed routines, doors were left unlocked, and names carried weight longer than facts. Ethan Walker was 24, not ambitious, not reckless, just invisible in the way good people often are. He worked nights at a distribution warehouse near the interstate, long shifts, loud machines, little talk. He rented a small apartment above a closed-down bakery, paid his bills on time, and called his mother every Sunday. No criminal record, no enemies, no secrets. On October 18, Ethan finished his shift at 3:12 in the morning. Security cameras showed him clocking out. His phone recorded a call to his girlfriend a few minutes later. He drove home the same route he always did. At a little after 4, a convenience store 3 miles away was robbed. The clerk was beaten badly, the cash register emptied. The security footage was blurry, a hooded figure, average height, wearing a dark jacket, the kind of description that could fit half the town. By morning, Ethan was asleep. By midday, his name was on a police report. It started with a mistake so small no one noticed it at first. A patrol officer reviewing traffic camera footage misread a license plate, one letter, one digit, later corrected in his notes but never fixed in the system. Ethan's car was flagged. Early afternoon, detectives knocked on his door. They were polite, calm, professional. They asked where he had been the night before. Ethan answered honestly. He showed his time card, his phone history, and even laughed nervously, saying they could call his supervisor. But something shifted when one detective stepped out to take a call. When he returned, his tone changed. He said they just needed Ethan to come down to the station and clear a few things up. Ethan hesitated, not knowing the clerk had just woken up, not knowing the clerk described the attacker as having a voice that sounded familiar, not knowing the system already had his photo attached to a case number. That afternoon, Ethan Walker walked into the police station, and he did not walk out that day, and by the time the mistake was discovered, his life was already breaking apart. The interview room was colder than Ethan expected, a square table, metal chairs, a camera in the corner that never blinked. They took his phone, his keys, his shoelaces, and told him it was standard procedure. Hours passed without questions. Then the questions came, slowly at first. Where were you really after work? Why did your car appear near the store? Why did the clerk say the voice sounded like yours? Ethan repeated the same answers again and again. The detectives listened without writing anything. One of them slid a photo across the table, a still image from the security footage, blurry, dark, almost nothing but the outline of a man. They said it matched his height, his build, his walk. Ethan shook his head, saying it could be anyone. They left the room and came back with coffee only for themselves. The clock on the wall stopped working. Or maybe Ethan just stopped noticing time. When they returned, the tone changed again. They told him the clerk was in critical condition. They told him juries believe victims. They told him honesty would help him later. Then they showed him a report stating his car had been identified near the scene. Ethan leaned forward, reading the plate number, realizing it was wrong, just slightly wrong, but wrong. He pointed at it, his voice shaking, saying that was not his plate. One detective frowned, said systems do not make mistakes. Another said maybe Ethan had forgotten something. Exhaustion can do that. They suggested maybe he had stopped at the store for gas. Maybe something went wrong. Maybe he did not mean to hurt anyone. Ethan said no again and again until the word felt empty. Sometime after midnight, a public defender appeared, tired, rushed, already convinced the evidence looked bad. She advised him to stay calm and stop talking. The detectives nodded as if relieved. They finally left him alone in the room. At 3:46 in the morning, Ethan was officially placed under arrest, charged with aggravated robbery and assault. The papers were signed, the camera kept recording, and somewhere in the building, the wrong license plate number stayed in the system untouched and correct. By morning, Ethan's name was no longer just a name, it was a headline. Local news stations repeated it slowly, clearly, as if saying it enough times would make it true. Warehouse worker arrested in violent robbery, a familiar face to neighbors, a quiet man with a hidden side. Reporters stood outside the police station, then outside the apartment above the old bakery, filming the boarded windows, the peeling sign, the door marked with evidence tape. People who barely knew Ethan were suddenly experts on who he was. A former coworker said he always seemed off, another said he kept to himself, as if that meant something. Online comments filled with certainty. Some said they always felt something was wrong, others said the police would not arrest someone without reason. His supervisor was asked for a statement and hesitated too long before saying Ethan had been reliable but quiet. That pause mattered more than the words. The store clerk was still in the hospital, unable to speak clearly, but detectives leaked that he had identified the suspect by voice and posture. Ethan's girlfriend stopped answering calls, not because she believed it, but because she was scared. His landlord changed the locks, citing safety concerns. His mother watched the news from her kitchen table, hearing her son described as dangerous and unknown. She called the station again and again until an officer finally told her he needed a lawyer, not a mother. By the end of the day, Ethan's mugshot replaced his driver's license photo online, his face flattened by fluorescent light, eyes red from sleeplessness and fear. In the holding cell, other inmates recognized him before he said a word. Someone laughed and asked how badly the clerk screamed that night. Ethan said nothing because nothing he said seemed to exist anymore, and somewhere between the headlines and the comments and the locked apartment, a story had formed, one that no longer needed facts to survive. 2 days after the arrest, a junior analyst in the traffic division reviewed the same footage again, not because she doubted the case, but because it was part of her checklist. She slowed the frames, adjusted contrast, zoomed into the rear plate of the dark sedan. The image was still grainy, but something felt off: the spacing between the letters, the angle of the bolt, the slight bend on the corner. She pulled the record attached to the case and compared it to the database photo of Ethan's car. They were close, almost identical, but not the same. The last character on the plate was an 8, not a 3. She wrote a note, flagged the timestamp, and sent it up the chain, marked low priority because the suspect was already in custody. The case moved faster than her message. In court, the prosecutor painted a simple picture: a quiet man, a late-night shift, a car near the scene, a victim who recognized the voice. Ethan's public defender tried to argue reasonable doubt, but the judge denied bail, citing community safety. Ethan was transferred to county jail, where time stretched and names disappeared. Weeks passed, the clerk recovered enough to speak, and his memory sharpened with each retelling until it felt real, even to him. The analyst checked the system again. Her note was still unread. She mentioned it to a supervisor, who said internal review could wait until after trial. Evidence only mattered if it changed the outcome, and everyone already knew how this would end. Ethan's mother sold her car to pay legal fees. His girlfriend moved out of state without saying goodbye, and Ethan learned the rhythm of jail counts, meal trays, and the sound of doors closing too hard and too often, all because of a detail small enough to be ignored and heavy enough to crush a life. 3 months after the arrest, the prosecution introduced a new witness, a man named Robert Hale, a regular at the convenience store, someone who claimed he had seen Ethan there before many times. He said he recognized the walk, the shoulders, the way the hood sat on his head. He testified with confidence, pointing across the courtroom as if memory were a photograph. The jury watched closely because certainty looks like truth. Ethan stared at the table, realizing he had never seen this man in his life. His lawyer whispered that eyewitnesses were powerful, even when they were wrong. After the testimony, the defense discovered Robert Hale had been shown Ethan's photo twice before the lineup, once on the news and once by a detective who said just look and see if it rings a bell. That detail was ruled unintentional contamination, not misconduct. The judge allowed the testimony to stand. The trial date was set quickly, too quickly for new experts, too quickly for appeals. Outside the courtroom, protesters gathered, some demanding justice, others demanding punishment. No one demanded patience. Inside jail, Ethan received a letter from his mother, written in shaky handwriting, saying she believed him even if no one else did. That night, his cellmate warned him to prepare himself because innocent men do not survive prison on hope alone. And Ethan understood then that the mistake was no longer just a clerical error, it had become a story too big to correct. A week before the trial, a private investigator hired with borrowed money reviewed the case one last time. With no expectations left, he drove the route between Ethan's warehouse and apartment, stopping at every intersection, looking for anything that had been missed. Behind a closed auto repair shop 2 blocks from the store, he found an old security camera pointed toward the street. Not listed in any police report. The owner said no one had asked him for the footage because the shop was closed that night. The investigator took a chance. The system was outdated but still running. The hard drive had not been overwritten. The footage showed a dark sedan passing at 4:03, then another at 4:07. The second car had a dented rear bumper and a different plate. The numbers were clearer than any other video in the case. It was not Ethan's car. The timestamp matched the robbery window exactly. When the investigator brought the footage to the prosecutor, it was labeled potentially exculpatory but unreliable due to angle and lighting. The motion to delay the trial was denied. The video was excluded for procedural reasons because it had not been disclosed within the required timeline. Ethan watched the ruling without reaction because hope had become dangerous. The trial began anyway, and for the first time, the state's case had a crack in it, small but visible, and everyone chose to look away. The trial lasted 4 days and felt like one long afternoon. The prosecutor spoke with confidence, repeating the same facts until they sounded solid. The defense spoke softly, careful not to anger the room. The jury watched the videos again and again. The blurry figure, the dark jacket, the shape that could have been anyone. The clerk testified, pointing to Ethan, and saying he was sure, now more sure than ever, because time had helped him remember. The eyewitness repeated his story without hesitation. The excluded footage was never mentioned. The license plate discrepancy was dismissed as irrelevant detail. Closing arguments ended before anyone felt ready. The jury deliberated less than 6 hours. When they returned, no one looked at Ethan. The foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts. The word echoed louder than anything Ethan had heard before. The judge thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing. The room emptied quickly as if nothing important had happened. Ethan's mother cried silently, holding a folded piece of paper with his childhood photo on it. The sentence came 2 weeks later, 15 years with eligibility for parole after 10 for a crime he did not commit. As he was led away, Ethan caught a glimpse of the junior analyst in the back of the courtroom, her eyes fixed on the floor. She had recognized the plate too, she just had not been loud enough. Prison was a world Ethan had never imagined. A concrete cage with metal bars and fluorescent lights that never turned off. The first week was the worst. The guards ignored him unless they wanted to remind him how small he was. Other inmates circled him like wolves, sizing prey. He kept his head down, spoke when necessary, and learned the rhythms of doors locking and unlocking, meals sliding through slots in the wall. Whispers of the outside world came in scraps, letters from his mother, mostly reassurance but also warnings about media attention and gossip. The news had moved on, the story forgotten, but the damage remained. Every day felt like an eternity, and yet there was a strange clarity in the monotony. Ethan began observing patterns, listening to conversations, memorizing routines. He made allies cautiously, men who had been betrayed by the system themselves. He started training mentally, remembering every detail about the robbery that night, every slip of the police procedure, every ignored camera and misplaced license plate. He imagined exposing it slowly, meticulously, without letting anyone else ruin it. Every now and then, he would sit by the small window in the cafeteria, watching the street below, imagining a different life, a life where the truth mattered, and waiting for a crack in the system that could bring it out. 6 months into his sentence, a letter arrived for Ethan from an unexpected source, a former delivery driver at the warehouse, someone who had seen him leave that night and remembered the exact route. The handwriting was messy but urgent. It said, "I think they got the wrong guy. I saw the car that passed the store that night. It had a dented bumper and numbers that didn't match yours. I kept quiet because I was scared and didn't want trouble." Ethan's heart pounding reading it, he folded the note carefully, memorizing every word. That night, he passed it to his lawyer, who agreed to investigate quietly. The next day, the lawyer managed to trace the driver, who confirmed everything on the letter, adding small details, the license plate, the color of the sedan, the dent, the scratches on the side. The investigator connected it with the footage, the old security camera nobody had noticed before. Suddenly, a tiny thread of truth was there, a thread strong enough to unravel months of conviction, but it was fragile. The prosecutor refused to review it without a formal motion. The motion would take weeks to approve, and in prison, weeks felt like months. The cell around Ethan seemed smaller than ever, but for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of something like hope, a dangerous spark that reminded him his life might not be lost yet. Ethan's lawyer filed the motion to reopen the case, citing the new witness and the forgotten camera footage. The judge scheduled a hearing, but the prosecution fought fiercely, claiming delays were unreasonable and evidence unreliable. Outside the courtroom, reporters smelled a story, and suddenly Ethan's case returned to headlines, but this time the tone was different. Some questioned the original verdict, some questioned the police work. Ethan spent the days in his cell imagining the hearing like a chessboard. Every move counted. Every word weighed against him. When the hearing finally began, the judge listened to the driver testify and watched the grainy footage projected onto a screen for the first time. The jury from the original trial sat silently in the back. The prosecutor argued it was circumstantial. The defense hammered on mistakes, misread plates, ignored cameras, and flawed eyewitness testimony. As the day wore on, tensions rose. The gallery whispered, and some guards watched closely. The air felt electric. Every second felt like a pivot in his life. When the judge finally spoke, he did not dismiss the motion immediately, but he ordered a full review before a ruling. Ethan returned to his cell, exhausted, terrified, and exhilarated. He knew nothing was won yet, but the first real crack in the wall had formed. The court-ordered review began with stacks of files overlooked for months. Every report, every note, every camera log was examined by a team of investigators and court clerks. They found errors that no one had noticed before. The original traffic camera footage was misfiled, the junior analyst's note about the license plate had been ignored, the eyewitness had been exposed to Ethan's photo twice, and that contamination had never been disclosed. The old security camera footage was authenticated and matched the robbery timeline perfectly. Even minor details in the clerk's statement contradicted previous testimony. When the prosecutor saw the compiled evidence, he froze. The documents on his desk for hours, a senior detective admitted procedural lapses, and clerks confirmed records had been misplaced. The judge read through the compiled report and finally ordered an emergency hearing to determine whether Ethan's conviction should stand. The news exploded again. Headlines shouted potential miscarriage of justice, social media erupted, debates divided the town, and Ethan watched from his cell. The walls felt less suffocating because, for the first time months, a path toward freedom seemed possible. But the path was dangerous because the prosecution had no intention of giving up easily. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters, family members, and curious onlookers filled every seat. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Ethan sat at the defense table, his hands clenched. His lawyer whispered the day would be long, and nothing was guaranteed. The prosecutor opened first, repeating the story as if the conviction were still solid, but every word was now under scrutiny. The defense laid out every mistake, every misfiled report, every overlooked camera and note. The junior analyst was called to testify about the license plate. The private investigator described the overlooked security camera. The delivery driver recounted the exact route and the different car. The clerk was brought in to clarify inconsistencies in his original statement and, under questioning, admitted memory had shifted and details had been influenced by stress and fear. The jury watched closely as pieces of the case fell apart like a crumbling wall. The prosecutor tried to object at every turn, but the judge allowed the evidence, claiming the severity of the original mistakes demanded full disclosure. Tensions boiled over when a witness lawyer accidentally contradicted a report, and murmurs ran through the courtroom. Ethan felt something he had not felt in over half a year, a weight lifting slowly and a dangerous hope settling in. After hours of testimony and arguments, the judge called a recess, and everyone filed out of the courtroom. Ethan remained seated, trying to steady his racing heart. Whispers and clicking pens filled the air outside as the jury and spectators waited anxiously. When the session resumed, the judge spoke clearly and slowly. He stated that the newly presented evidence and procedural errors were significant enough to question the integrity of the original conviction. He declared a preliminary ruling to vacate Ethan's guilty verdict temporarily, pending a full retrial. The room erupted in quiet chaos. Reporters scribbled notes, phones recorded every word. The prosecutor's face tightened into a mask of frustration, while the defense team exchanged glances of cautious relief. Ethan felt his knees weaken as if the walls of the prison that had held him for months were dissolving. The judge added that Ethan would be released on bail until the retrial. The courtroom guards were stunned. The bail amount was posted, and the papers signed within the hour. Ethan walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun, feeling every sensation at once. the air smelled different, freedom tasted dangerous yet sweet, and for the first time in nearly a year, the world seemed to recognize him not as a criminal but as a man wronged. After the retrial, Ethan walked out of the courthouse a free man. The sun was sharp on his face, but it felt alive for the first time in over a year. He returned to his small apartment, slowly cleaning out the memories of confinement and rebuilding a life paused for too long. He reconnected with his mother and former friends, though some relationships had broken beyond repair. He found work at a different warehouse where he was valued, not just for efficiency, but for honesty. The local community gradually shifted from suspicion to cautious support. The clerk recovered fully and publicly admitted his mistaken identification, which helped Ethan heal the invisible scars of shame and fear. He began volunteering with organizations helping wrongfully convicted individuals, sharing his story to prevent mistakes from destroying others. He realized that justice was fragile and often delayed, but it could be reclaimed with persistence, patience, and a relentless search for truth. At night, he would sit by the small window in his apartment, looking at the quiet streets once again familiar yet transformed, and he understood that while the mistake had nearly ruined him, the fight for truth had given him something stronger, a life reclaimed, and the knowledge that even in the darkest errors, justice could still return.